Good morning, everyone. We're currently admitting everyone to today's workshop, so just have a little patience with us while we invite everyone into this digital space for today's workshop. All right, with that, I think everyone is now in, and of course, more people will join us, and that's okay, but we're going to go ahead and get started so we can maximize the amount of time that we have available to ask our illustrious panelists all of these burning questions that we have about building paths to academic careers. My name is Tiffany Early-Spadoni, and I am the chair of the ASOR's Early Career Scholars Committee. And the Early Career Scholars Committee is dedicated to promoting community advocacy as well as professionalization among our early career members, which includes everything from undergraduate students to people just starting out in their careers, such as myself. And we see the growth of our field as very much related to how we support you in these early stages of your career. So feel free to join us on Facebook, Twitter, and to get involved in all of our activities. We'd love to have you as a part of our Early Career Scholars family. We are, I would like to say, aware that right now are difficult times in the world, more generally, as well as in the academy in particular. However, we realize that you guys still have important questions that you need answered, vital questions about your training and about how to best prepare yourself. And so that's the spirit with which we have organized this workshop today. At this point, I would like to introduce our moderator, Vanessa Workman, who is a PhD student at Bar-Ilan University working on a topic in Levantine archaeology. She'll be moderating our panel today, and I turn it over to her at this point.
Thanks, Tiffany. Welcome, everyone. Happy breakfast, lunch, or dinner, wherever you happen to be. Thanks for joining us today. As Tiffany already aptly explained, that we're very excited to share this session and to invite you to ask questions, participate towards the end of the session after we've began our discussion. Let's see if I can get this right. And I'll start with an introduction of our panelists, our 5 panelists who have very generously agreed to guide us in some of these issues today. I will pose to them a few roundtable questions that many of you have already submitted online in our Dory poll, so thank you for that. And then if we have time, hopefully, even though these are some big questions, we'll open it up to any questions that the participants may have. So without further ado, I want to say a big thank you to Professors Jay Crososmo, Professor Jane Derose Evans, Professor Erin Mayer, Professor Julia Trochet, and Professor Lawson Younger for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom with us. And I will turn it over to them, and I will stop sharing my screen for now so we can all see each other to introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves. So I'll start with you, Jay.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, as Vanessa said, I'm Jay Crososmo. I am an associate professor of Assyriology at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the US. Really quickly, I started out in biblical studies at a small undergrad liberal arts college, moved on to doing Hebrew Bible at a seminary before deciding Bible wasn't for me and moving more into ancient Middle East studies and Assyriology in particular. So I did my PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, and did a short postdoc also at Berkeley before lucking into my current position as one of the lucky few here at University of Michigan. Thank you.
I'm Jane Derose Evans. I'm a professor and chair of the art history department at Temple University, and I actually took off time between undergraduate and graduate school to decide if that's really what I wanted to do. And I went back later and got my degree at Penn. in classical archaeology, but I do teach art history. I don't teach in an archaeology department. There is an anthro department in our school. Since becoming chair 3.5 years ago, I have also chaired, I think, 6 job searches. So I'm ready to hear about questions about that.
Me? Okay. Hello, everybody. It's good evening here. Good afternoon in the States. I'm Aaron Mayer. I'm a professor of archaeology at Bar-Ilan University. I'm currently the director of the Institute of Archaeology. And for the last, it's horrible to say, 25 years, I've directed the excavations at Tel Safi Ghat. Among other things, I'm also Vanessa Workman's PhD advisor. I was born in the States, came to Israel when I was 11 years old. Since then, I've been in Israel, and I studied all degrees at the Hebrew University, first in Jewish history and archaeology, and then archaeology. Did my PhD under Ami Mazar and Joseph Yellen. And then while still in my PhD, I started teaching at Bar-Ilan University. It's been a wild and crazy ride since then.
Hi, I'm Julia Trochet. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to be here and for participating in this. I also took a year off between my undergrad and grad, or took a little bit of time off there. And so I think that's something also that we could speak to. I started my undergrad or finished it at UCLA in history and Near Eastern language and cultures. I was unique in that I went straight from undergrad to grad, which I kind of think is something you can't really do anymore. And that's something else we can comment on. I did take a year off, but I didn't have an MA in between, and my graduate program never gave me an MA. So I have a PhD and no MA. And then I got my PhD at Brown University in Egyptology and Assyriology. So a pretty narrow degree. But my position now is assistant professor in the history department at Missouri State University, which is in Springfield, Missouri. So that's sort of Southwest Missouri. And so I hope to be able to speak to later on sort of how to frame yourself into different contexts. And so my degree in particular was very, very narrow. And I was trained as a philologist and an archaeologist. And, you know, those are skills that don't always translate to art history and history departments. And so I'm hoping that's something we can speak to and sort of thinking about how we present ourselves in this really, really challenging market. And I will echo what I think Jay said earlier. I was very lucky to get this position. And I think that's another component we can speak about as well. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Lawson Younger. I am professor of Old Testament Semitic languages and ancient Near Eastern history at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School of Trinity National University. I, like Jay, also started same way, going through seminary program, and then did my PhD in biblical studies at Sheffield University. In the meantime, in between my seminary time and my time at Sheffield, I had the opportunity to study at the Hebrew University. And that's where I really fell in love with ancient Near Eastern languages and literatures. And that's why I've continued to work in that vein for the rest of my life. I've had fellowships at Yale and at Cambridge, and I especially enjoy working with Arameans. They're my favorite people. And Aaron likes them too. And anyway, so I like that because it keeps me involved with Hebrew Bible. It keeps me involved with Syriology, archaeology, and Luvian studies, which is another sub area where I work. So I'm the only one at a divinity school, so I can maybe speak to some particular questions that some of you might have regarding that. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you all. So we'll start our discussion off in the vein of trying to disseminate some quality information about the various approaches to education and skill building during these undergraduate and graduate years. So my first question that I'd pose to the panelists are that we are now in a climate where students are pressured to achieve more and more at younger ages and at earlier stages of their education. So in order to take best advantage of these years and this time and to make meaningful progress, what are some of the more important skills and experiences one can gain at these undergraduate and graduate levels? Now, this is a big question and quite a big span of time. So I'll welcome you all to address whatever you would like within that you feel most comfortable. Jay, we'll start with you.
Okay, I have the fun part of having my last name be first in alphabetical order, so I get to set, the agenda every time. But I'll try to keep my comments short for each question so that everybody else has enough time to talk. I'm going to look at this more at a very practical level, right? So if you're looking at trying to get a career in academia, one of the things I tell my students, and I just taught a graduate seminar on methodologies and research and how to basically function in academia. One of the things I've been talking to them about is looking at the jobs that you find interesting over the last 5 to 10 years in your field, whether that be your specific field or something broader, things that you could imagine yourself going into. Looking at those calls, all these positions present their ideals in their calls, and then comparing that with the people who actually got those jobs. So that would give you a sense for what these jobs that you're hoping to land, what they're looking for, because they usually will list skills, will list ideal, broader things like whether that be digital studies or somebody who can work in administration. You get a good sense from these calls, these job postings, what institutions are looking for, what departments are looking for these positions that you're hoping to land. And then if you compare that with the people who were actually hired, you can see where there are divergencies, where these people actually fit the proposals and where they didn't. And maybe you can start to figure out from there, collect the data, do research and figure out what are these skills that helped these individuals get these positions, and whether or not they fit with the initial call, what was that all about? So that's kind of where I would start with it on just a very practical level, and leave it to others to add.
Since I'm second in the alphabet, I get to go second. I would agree with that. I would also say though that things are changing. I wouldn't go back 10 years. I think things are changing so fast that your skills, you need to think about them in the broadest terms possible. So digital humanities is going to be big in lots of ways, but also thinking about how you do research and how to broaden your research skills so that you can apply them in very different areas. I think more and more people are going to go to interdisciplinary studies. And so you also need to be able to, I think, to teach on a much broader scale than I have been ever asked to. People ask me, have you ever been able to teach your specialty? My specialty is coins, ancient coins. And no, I have never been able to do that. But more and more, I'm asked to teach broader and broader things as, for instance, art history departments are having to do more and more with fewer faculty members.
Okay, I would start one step backwards, and I think it's an important thing to ask, do I want to be an academic with all the responsibilities that this entails? Because one of the things that I've seen for years, and I see it till today, and among colleagues, is you have colleagues who are simply not enjoying their life. They don't enjoy teaching, or they don't enjoy research. It's hard for them to write. They don't like the administration or whatever it is. And that's something that you have to take into account when you're choosing an academic profession, is that's what you're going to be required to do. And if writing is like a torture for you, or teaching is a torture for you, or marking papers is a torture for you, then you're in the wrong field. If you do enjoy these things, and I happen to enjoy all the various, or I would say not all, it's never all,
Marking papers, yeah.
95% of what I do, it's a fascinating profession, because you basically get to do what you're interested in, and you can do it as much as you want to. So I would say that's the main starting point that I suggest to people. Another thing is, and this I think I've warned all my PhD students, and I think Vanessa may have heard this from me as well, is when someone comes to do a PhD, I say, you do realize that chances of getting a job are very slim. So I think that's something that anybody going into the field, I don't want to say don't go in because you don't have a chance, but you should realize that this is something that nowadays in the current job market, one, getting a job in general, and two, the type of job you get may be very different from this from the Indiana Jones image of a job that you thought you'd get many years ago. Then moving towards the actual what to do, and I have other things. I'll just bring up a couple of things now and I'll continue with they're not mentioned later. Is I think you have to train yourself in all the skills, and that starts with, for example, you have to learn how to type well. That's very basic. I mean, and even though today we all everybody's brought up with a computer, keyboard, fused to your body, there still are many students who don't type well, and are still typing in very basic manner. So if you can, for example, learn how to type at a very early stage, you're saving yourself in your career a lot of time and effort. Then when you study, as Jane said, you have to take into account that you may be doing things that are very off from your specific interests. And so you have to study broadly, be interested in broadly, read broadly, so that you're not just an expert on the coins of the latter part of Hadrian's reign. Excuse me for using coins, numismatics as an example. It works for anything. I think that will give you the ability to, one, expand your expertise in different directions as your career develops. And many of us didn't continue in their career at what the things they thought they would be doing originally. Two is to enable you to give these courses. Because if you come to a place and say, listen, I can talk about late Bronze Age pottery and maybe late Bronze Age scarabs, and that's what I teach, they'll show you the door. And a final point, and there I'll let people go on, is I think when you're studying, you should always try to combine between, let's say, plain vanilla archaeology and one or two expertises that are marketable. And what I mean marketable is that things that either you or your colleagues or your professors say, oh, those fields are the future. That's where we're going to be needing people in the coming years. And if you have one or two of those skills, which may develop into an important aspect of archaeology, you have an advantage on the job market. That's for now.
I agree. So I'll echo basically what everybody else has said and add just a few comments. I think going off this last point of sort of finding something unique that you can contribute, I think is really key. So if you love archaeology, but you also are great at photography, then work on your photography skills, and you can work as a registrar or in museums, or, if you love, I had some students at one point who were split between Egyptology and pre-med. And I was like, do both and become a bioarchaeologist, so I think if there are things that you love and skills that you're good at, be them digital, photography, scientific applications, because you did have an engineering background or a chemistry background, like that all really helps. And so I think maybe at one point we were told sort of focus in, become really good at the things, that you're studying. And we're sort of maybe the older tradition was get a really sort of narrow topic and be the expert, the only person who does that in the world. But I agree what everyone's saying. I think now we're really having to open up, and, you know, I teach world history from prehistory through 1600 CE. And so there's a lot in there that I didn't get training for, but luckily I actually taught at a high school in my year off. And so I think things that once might have been seen as less prestigious or less sort of, you know, that's not what like real scholars do, teaching at the high school level or something, is now actually the reason why I probably got my job, right? Is because I had experience teaching world history. And so I think thinking broadly about what you're passionate about. If you love research, then invest in language skills early on, because you're going to really, really need those. If you love teaching and education, then teach and docent at museums and do as much outreach as you can. And so just find a thing that you love about academia and really try to invest in that and diversify your portfolio, right? So if you love education, think about all the ways you can participate in education activities that aren't maybe mainstream. If you are great at writing, think about working in a writing center. I worked in a writing lab as a grad student, and now I'm teaching writing for history. And that's a course that my department has. And that, again, was a way that I could sort of sell that. So just think about the things that you're good at, think about the things that you enjoy, and really try to invest in developing broadly those skills that are applicable both to your degree, but also could be applicable widely. And the other thing I'll just say, the last point is, I mentioned that I skipped the MA basically, and I would not recommend doing that. I think I desperately wish I had more time to learn more languages, more time to become familiar with more content. And I was just so eager. And I thought, you know, the best thing to do is to be young and to get your degree and to keep, you know, go through as fast as you can. And, you know, and that really, I don't think you need to take 15 years if you can help it. You probably won't have funding for that anymore. But I would say really just take the time. Don't rush through undergrad. If you can finish in 3 years, maybe take a 4th year to, you know, get German if you haven't done German yet, or to sort of fill out some of those gaps. And so just take the time. If you have it, take it, and then invest broadly in those skills.
Yeah, I would, being last, I'm used to that with my name. But I would simply say I second really has been said before. I would really stress some of the things that Julia has just been stressing. Hone your writing skills. I mean, those you can always improve your writing skills. Your oral communication, that's another area that I think is very important. If you're going to teach, you need to have good communication skills, which also means nowadays developing your digital skills. So that's another thing. And the language skills cannot be overemphasized. Learning German, learning French, gaining competency, reasonable competency in these languages are still quite crucial. And if you're looking at PhD study, these are things that you can do as an undergrad to really put yourself up a notch in evaluation with PhD committees that are accepting students. So I would really emphasize that. And finally, critical thinking skills. It's amazing how many of some of our scholars still exhibit a lack of really good logic at point, right, guys? So developing critical thinking skills, I think, is not to be underemphasized. I think it really is important. Take a logic course. You'd be amazed at how much that can improve your ability to think well, and that'll improve your writing. So those are just some practical things from my point of view.
Thank you. All right, I'm hearing some pushback from the speakers that we need to change up the order for each question. So I think we'll start with you, Lawson, for the next one, and
okay.
move backwards between the.
Okay, first shall be last, and the last shall be first.
Yes. I'm hearing some feedback about this.
Okay.
Maybe you've all already addressed this, but just as a second part to this question, and maybe this is something I'll just open to if anyone has something to add. of where does one, find this list of skills. Julia mentioned it a bit. Jay mentioned it a bit already. If they know what academic path to look down, where do they search for then this list of necessary skills and experience that will lead them to being qualified for these positions?
Oh, well, I'm not entirely sure I understand that the wording of the question there, but I guess what I would just say quickly, and then I will let others jump in, is that one of the best resources that you have are your current faculty. Take advantage of them. Get to know them, get to know what they know. And another thing that I think is always really good is if you can attend an ASOR conference, even a regional. These are helpful moves on your part to get an idea about what is going on and who's doing what and what you might like to do. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I'm giving a shot at it. Is that kind of what you were looking for, Vanessa?
Yeah, we had a few questions posed into the chat about, I understand I would like to be an Assyriologist or an art historian. Where do I look for what qualifications? Now, Jay, I believe, mentioned looking at CVs, but there may be some students who don't know where to find resources like this.
Yeah.
Sort of, when you go into a communications job, there's a list of skills that one should have. How does one in academia find that list of skills?
You can often find it if you just Google faculty members. You can often find a CV or other general information. So that's I would always start all these things on the internet and take advantage of our digital world. That'd be my comment, and I'll let others jump in.
I'll just briefly add to that, informational interviews. I think if there's somebody who has the job that you love, send them an email, and they could be rude and ignore you or not have time because they're busy and not trying to be rude. I mean, it's possible, but I don't think there's any harm in just sending an email and saying, I'm an undergrad at X and Y place. I'm really interested in becoming an Egyptologist. I read an article you wrote, or, whatever it might be, however you came to that person. I Googled Egyptology and I found your name, or Assyriology. Could you speak with me a bit about how to get into that? Because I don't have any advisors here or mentors here who can speak to that for me. And I would, if somebody sent me that email, FYI, I can't maybe respond to 50 of them, but I would be happy to help with that and to recommend other people. If it was something I couldn't give advice on, I'm in a history position and someone wants to know about art history, I can forward it to other people.
Right.
So I think informational interviews are really important. If you can't, because sometimes that gives context to the CVs. And CVs, usually, if you go to university websites, for those who may not know, most university websites will have professors listed and will have their CVs somewhere on their website. So if you're not sure how to find them, that might be a good place. Or academia.edu has a lot of stuff posted there as well. So those are two good places to start if you're not familiar with those resources.
Okay. First of all, I agree very much with Julia that I think a very important thing is simply to contact people. I would say, I don't know, 2 out of 3, 1 out of 2 will answer you, very nicely. And I find it extraordinarily encouraging when a young student, high school student or whatever, reaches out to me and wants to know about my field. I feel it's something that I want to assist in because it's important. And another thing is, and this is particularly true for archaeology, is experience. We have the opportunity from a high school age onwards to volunteer and participate in excavations, whether in your hometown, let's say in the States, or once you get older, when there used to be this thing called international travel. When we can one day do that.
Right.
Travel to participate in excavations, and even though you may fall in love with one specific excavation, try different types of excavations, areas, cultures, etc., and then you get a feel for the materials, you get a feel for the people that you meet, and I think something that we'll probably return to later on choosing your PhD program, I would say the number one thing is nice people. Everything else is secondary. So I think it's an important way to get to know the people in the field and what they're doing. And I'm sure even as a inexperienced, even before college level, you'll be able to see who are the professionals who are really pushing the field in the envelope and who are just doing more of the same. And a final thing is one of the enjoyable things and yet annoying parts of being a professor of archaeology is about once a month I get an email from someone who has read 2 books and has the solution to the problems of the ancient Near East. So if you want to get a professor to take you seriously, don't start that way. Okay.
That's really funny. Talking to people, absolutely. And I'm going to put in a plug for the ASOR meetings too. They're perfect. You can come, you can really meet people. I have found almost everyone to be very, very helpful. I think that's the best way.
Yeah, I just add to that, what everybody else has said, and especially, email people. If they don't respond to you, maybe that tells you something about wanting to, interact with them more. But definitely ASORs, I know, look, going to ASORs, going to conferences, there are costs involved in that. But as Dr. Early Spadoni has said in the chat, with virtual conferences, and we'll get to this as one of these positives that's come out of COVID, this allows you broader opportunities to talk to people, or attending things like this, right? Now you know all the different faces who are at least here in the public space saying, oh yeah, we'd love to talk to you. So take advantage of that. Introduce yourself, and get to know us, let us get to know you. Those are some of the best ways to set yourself up.
ASOR has scholarships too. And so if I might just interject real quick, look into that, because ASOR wants to help support you in this endeavor.
Thank you. Our next question is something that Aaron just touched on, but we had quite a few questions saying, I know I want to pursue an MA, I know I want to pursue a PhD, but I just don't know how to choose a school, a department, an advisor, and then a topic. So again, I'll open the big question, and a second part to that, which I think we can address within the same answer, is how do PhD committees look at students? What are schools necessarily looking for when you apply?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I guess we can go back through the correct alphabetical.
Okay. I mean, we've already touched on it a little bit, right? To talk to these people that that you're doing some interesting work in the field. If you're able to go to conferences, if you're able to email people, get to know them. One of the things I did before starting PhD studies, I'm going to sound like I do a lot of data-oriented research, and I don't think you need to do this necessarily, but it's helpful, is to, again, just kind of look around at the people who have jobs in these fields and look at their connections, look at who they worked with, look at what they did, etc. So one of the things that stuck out to me when I was applying for PhD studies is I noticed that a lot of people getting jobs in Assyriology or Assyriology ancillary jobs were coming from only a couple different places and working with or had connections to a handful of scholars. I mean, we could talk about the problems with these network-oriented systems that are in place, but they are what exist, and they're a good way for you to know if there's a future for you post PhD, because this person has connections, or these people have a history of helping people find connections. And the other thing I would add to that is when you're looking for somebody to work with, look at their ideas, look at how they treat people, and look at how, and talk to other people, and especially their students. And I'll just kind of leave it there.
Yeah, that's really important, though. Asterisk that, everybody. In my program, things are a little bit different between MA and PhD. In the MA, we ask people to do things on a more general level. And so you would be taking classes outside of the ancient world, although you would be doing your qualifying paper on the ancient world. And so for the MA, where you would generally probably not spend more than 2 years. If you spend more than 2 years, maybe academia isn't for you at all. It's not quite as important as having that person that you really need in place. But for the PhD, you have to be able to work with this person. You are going to be working with them intensively for maybe 7 years. And if you get there and find out they're a creep and you can't do it, you're stuck. So yeah, call them on the phone, talk to them, not only make sure that your methodologies might line up, but make sure that your personality works with them as well. And, I hate to say this too, but kind of look if are they publishing? Are they up on the research? Are they going to be able to connect you with people in the field, or are they kind of at the end of things and not as interested in doing research and not, getting to that point in their life where they're just not doing it anymore, but they still want graduate students. You have to be a little cold-blooded about this, because it's you, after all, that are going to be there. And doing this kind of work. You don't necessarily have to go in with a topic. I would say when you are applying for a PhD, you should say in your application, I want to work with this person and this is why. If you come in and just say, I want to work in the ancient world, you're not going to get very far in the committee. But, do your homework, make sure you've talked to this person, make sure that, and you tell them this is why. But you don't necessarily have to have a topic. That's, after all, what you're going to be doing in your classes, is exploring things and figuring out what it is that your dissertation proposal is going to be about. We have very, very few people who come in saying, I want to do this topic, and they're going to change it anyway by the time they get done with their first semester of classes. So, there. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, again, I agree with more or less everything that was said here. I just would add that, again, the doing detective work about the potential people you want to work with is important, and speaking to the professor, speaking to his students, current and former, and very often former who already have a job are freer to express their views. Another thing is, again, to the excavations. If you can participate in excavation with someone who is a grumpy, unapproachable person, then that's someone that you don't want to work with on your PhD. Continuing something else that Jane said is that in many fields of archaeology, which is started to a certain extent is branching off in this aspect from many other humanities aspects, is that a lot of publications are multi-authored, and that very often indicates that either the professor has a workforce which he slave drives, and then he signs his name on the paper, or I would say in most cases it means that there's collaborative research, and that first of all indicates that there is a collaborative joint effort between senior and junior members of a team. And 2, that will also help you in the next stage, because if you finish up your PhD with a series of articles that you're a co-author on, or a lead author, and depending, of course, what type of PhD you're doing, that gives you that much more ammunition for the next stage of trying to get a job after your PhD. So I think and it's also a nice indication of whether there's someone to talk to when you're working. And it's intensive, and and B, it's an aspect of, you want someone who cares. You want someone who is, if you send in your a chapter, it will be read in a relatively acceptable amount of time, that the comments will be constructive, positive, educational, and not someone who's just going to say, oh, I forgot about that, sorry, and send you back something with two scribbled notes on it. So that's something that you can't always see that beforehand, but by getting to know them personally and through their circle of acquaintances, and particularly their circle of present and former students, you may get an idea about that. Okay.
So at Missouri State here, we only have an MA program, so I can't speak to accepting PhD students because I'm not on that side of the committee. But from being a graduate student, I can echo what everybody else is saying. I agree with just somebody you can work with. And it's not, and even if they're not the most like famous person in the world, I actually worked with somebody who is rather famous in my field. But you know, the benefit of working with someone who maybe is slightly lesser known is that they're going to write letters for you and maybe not too many other people. And so my advisor was very supportive and very encouraging, but like everybody and their mother knew him and wanted a letter from him. And he isn't somebody who's going to like not write letters for people when he knows that they're good people. And so if there's a job I'm applying to in the past where I'm sure everybody had a letter from the same person and, you know, and how much does it sort of, what's the weight of that then when sort of it's coming? So having one or two people in your committee that maybe are up and coming or a little bit outside your field, who can add maybe different insights, I think is also a benefit. So it's like having the name recognition is great, but then also being able to have maybe somebody who is only kind of writing for you and one other person is pretty special as well. And I would also just say that I know we have a large MA program here that's growing, in part because you can do it entirely online. And we have some people who want to come here and do online MAs and then go on to like a PhD in ancient history or, you know, something more specific. And I think there can be really good online programs. I think ours actually, I would have to say, I think like is pretty rigorous and pretty good. But you're not getting that one-on-one personal connection in the same way as you would in a seated sort of environment. And so if you have the option and the ability, even if it's for like one semester, if you're doing an online program or mixed program, you really want to be able to like meet with your faculty in especially the MA level. So that way you can get really good letters of rec that can get you into the PhD program. Same thing with an undergrad. If you're largely doing undergrad online or remote, try to find ways to have one-on-one conversations with your faculty members. So that way they can write you really strong letters of rec. I think letters of rec matter a lot for better and for worse. And so I think you want to develop really strong relationships there, and that can get you to the next level at every stage of your career.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said. I just encourage you to think really long and hard about what exactly are your interests and who you best match with for doing either MA or PhD study. What different programs might be able to do for you. Talk to current students. Those are all, I think, really good suggestions. And I would want to really emphasize that PhD programs tend to really scrutinize your intent statement or your purpose statement. So take a lot of time and put a lot of effort into that. If you can talk to others who can give you strong suggestions about that, how to word it, what might be better to do. Your writing sample is also, I think, a very important piece. I teach at an institution that has both master's level, 3 different master's levels, as well as a PhD program. And so all of those things are quite crucial as we evaluate potential acceptances.
Let me just add one more thing. I think that when coming to a PhD committee, or not even in an institution, not even where there's a committee, but you want to impress a specific professor, I think if you have the ability to come with an additional skill set, for instance, leadership abilities, knowledge of some other aspect, unusual experience, nothing to do with archaeology. You spent a year canoeing the Congo. I don't know, something like that. That adds to your character as it appears before the committee, an interesting aspect which will catch their eyes and hopefully positively, and then say, oh, he might be or she might be someone that we want to include in our program.
Okay, so we'll now move on to, I phrase this question to you in a bigger sense in things that you see students rush into during their early degrees, but most of the questions most center on, should I publish at the MA? Should I publish at the PhD? Big questions on how this can affect your career or your chances of getting into the MA and how your applications are perceived at those levels. Lawson, would you like to start?
Well, I mean, if you're an undergrad, I would discourage you from really thinking too much about trying to publish. You've got other skills that you need to gain competence in, and I would encourage you to work hard at that. At the MA level, again, you're really trying to gain competencies, and I really don't encourage my students to try and write. Having said that, I've had some that have done it, and you know, one or two it's helped them in their PhD applications. But I would just generally discourage that, because I really feel strongly that you're better off gaining competencies rather than trying to publish at that level. Now, once you're into the PhD, now it is another issue. But I think, again, the first couple of years of your PhD, again, you're trying to gain competencies and specialties and things like that. And you're having to write papers, you're having to do things. Some of those may lead to a publication, but I wouldn't really work towards that end in your first couple of years. As you move further in, yes, look at papers that you've done, research that you've done. There may be a real contribution that you can make, and then I would do that. I published my first article while still in my PhD program, had another already in the works, so that it actually came out about the same time that I finished my PhD. So I think, but I was a long ways along and had done a lot of work already and gained the competencies necessary, because you want to be able to look at virtually everything that's been published on that particular subject in the different areas of research. And so if there is something in German or French, Italian, you might very well need to look at that before you go publishing an article. And I would really encourage you, modern Hebrew, I would encourage you to get hold of the English abstract and at least look at it first to see whether it's something that you need to really delve into. But if it is, you need to do it in order to then be really contributing to the field in the way that you want to contribute. And that'll make a difference, I think, when it comes to the job market. Because I think people in the job market are going to look at that article and they'll see the level of competency that comes shining through, and it'll make a difference. So that would be my advice. And I know I've spoken a little longer, but hey, others have had their time. So there you are. Hope it helps.
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't want to rush into anything that once it's published, it's going to be there. And so if you're on the job market and the only thing that's available or the thing that pops up first when people are looking for you is the undergraduate article you publish, that may not be what really truly reflects your knowledge or expertise or skills coming out of the PhD or MA, then that's not going to help you. I think if there's an opportunity to publish in like an undergrad journal, like at your university, I think that could be a good experience. But I think, you know, if trying to get into like the academic articles and journals, I mean, I think that might be a little bit of a necessary uphill climb at that time when, as was mentioned, you could be focusing on other skill sets. I think in MA or something, if you have an opportunity to co-author, or in your early years in the PhD program, to, you know, to participate in authoring a section of an article about an excavation or something like that could be a great opportunity, but I wouldn't go on it solo. In part also because it's an emotionally like devastating experience at times, or it can be. And so you want to make sure that you feel confident in your knowledge and what you know, and what you want to put forth before sort of jumping into that. So yeah, I would, but that being said, I've chaired 2 job searches in the last 3 years since I've been here, and you better have a publication to even get considered in the job search for an assistant level position at a mid-range state university, right? So you're going to want at least 1 publication when you're on the job market. Now that could be that you take a year or 2. I was lucky to have 2 years as an instructor and lecturer before getting my tenure track job. So I was able to get something out in those 2 years. So if you can get a postdoc, if you can, you know, I hate to say it, don't do this forever, but adjunct for like a year or something, and then get an article out during that time. But you do want to have an article out by the time you're on the job market. So finding that sweet spot between PhD and job market.
Maybe I'll take the opposite thing. I've been very often accused that I publish too much. So so I
No comment. No comment.
You get an article from me only every other 2 weeks. Yeah.
That's right.
If I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, I published my first article in a minor journal when I was still in my 3rd year of my BA. And in fact, I delayed starting my PhD, and then I had published a couple of articles and excavation reports before I started my PhD. So I think there is something, if you do have the writing skills, if you have the ability, if you control the languages, if you can type and have the ability to write coherently, I don't think you should be totally against publishing or at an early stage, but you should be aware of your limitations as a scholar, and so that if you publish with more senior scholars, or make sure that your papers are read by senior scholars, that's a way to, I would say, at least make sure that that what you're publishing is qualitative. And another thing is, in the Europe and Israel, I don't know if it's so for departments in the States, more and more students are going towards what we call article PhDs. That means you're writing a PhD, which is very often comprised of 3 published articles, like Vanessa is doing this, 3 published articles, which have to, in most cases, have to be accepted or published by the time you submit your doctorate. And then you write an introduction and a summary, which ties these articles together. Now, the advantage of this is that when you finish your PhD, you have 3 articles in your hand for the job market. You've honed your skills of writing articles, which is very different from writing a PhD. And to a certain extent, taking 3 articles with the summary and with the introduction and the summary, which you've already written, and if you want to turning that into a book, may often be even easier than shaving off all the loose ends of a PhD to turn that into a book. You know, it's one is building up, the other is taking off. So there is an advantage also in that aspect, that you finish your studies with more to show. And the same thing goes for the MA. Now, people in archaeology, and you'll excuse the jab at the Assyriologists or the biblical scholars, there's not that much new material out all the day. We haven't found a new book of the Bible in quite a while now. If you work in a project and new finds come out, and you're in a project which is user-friendly and is friendly to students and young scholars, you may have an opportunity to publish a new find, a new context, or something of that sort, which may, for example, be the topic of your master's thesis or whatever, and that can turn into yet one more publication along the way. And I think that is a very, very important component, both for the various stages in your studies. And I think, if you come to a PhD committee and you already have two good articles, that's an astounding argument in your favor. And the same thing goes for as you finish your PhD. And very often, although we'll probably talk about this soon, that the importance of the postdoc, many of us, and this is my experience, and I'm sure it's the experience of most people, using a paratrooper's terminology, you land running. You finish your PhD, and before you know what's going on, you're running to the next job, et cetera, and you don't have time, et cetera. So if you can finish that and have something to show, which before you get into this rat race, that's an important asset to have.
Yeah, for PhD, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit on that. For PhDs in the U.S., it's doing the 3-article and then the intro and conclusion, probably not a good model, partly because tenure committees want to see a book when you're done, and it has to be different than your dissertation. So, you can't write a book when you're going up for tenure, because it's completely different than your dissertation. They want your dissertation to be at least partially reworked so that you've rethought it. I also wanted to talk about different ways of publishing, because that's what we're working with now with our younger faculty. What about people doing blogs? What about people, doing kind of digital media kind of things? Well, I would say older tenure committees are starting to realize that this is a true avenue of scholarship in terms of art history. If you want to be talking about race decolonization of art history, you go on Twitter. It's kind of crazy, but that's where you go. So people are starting to do that. I would say be careful about doing things that are not peer reviewed by somebody. Just kind of writing a wiki post out there is not going to help you very much for your tenure committee. But if you can say, look, I have this blog and I'm doing it with someone who's my editor, and blah blah, and that's okay. I would say the same thing about the pacing of it, that I would not really expect anything from MAs. PhDs, we actually also have to tell our students to not do too many conference papers a year, because you can get so absorbed in doing those that you don't do the work that you're supposed to be doing. And the only other warning I would say is sometimes I have my graduate students come to me and ask me if they should post their papers on academia.edu or researchgate.net. And I say, no, absolutely not, because they are not peer reviewed, and you don't want people, taking your ideas and putting them somewhere else. Don't publish anything on academia.edu until it is been peer reviewed. It's actually an article or something.
Yeah, Professor Derose Evans actually beat me to this. I was going to talk about alternative publications. So you've already done that. But generally speaking, I think my advice would be don't publish anything unless you have something important to say. It's not a good publication if all you're going to do is reiterate what's been said over the last 200 years in your field, or to add just a small minor detail. That said, there are avenues for doing stuff like that. Twitter, blogging, Assyriology has Nabu, right, which are these tiny little published notes that aren't actually peer reviewed. And we should actually be thinking about, other things, right? So it's not just publications, but name recognition, people who can recognize you. So if you do have something to say, or if you have ways of communicating the field, ways of communicating your research, you can try to do those things. You need to be careful. You need to be, you need to recognize how those might be received, but I have no problem with saying, if somebody's invited you onto a podcast to talk about your dissertation research, or to even say, I really want to hear more about the ancient Middle East, to go ahead and do that. And there are a lot of public work available, there are a lot of public facing scholarship that traditionally we haven't taken advantage of, and that's been a detriment to all of our fields. But the more you do that, the more you are Googleable, if that's a word, and the more the more the more that people want to hear what you have to say, right? So if you're a PhD student, or if you're an MA, and you can say, I've been doing this stuff on Twitter, I've been doing this stuff with a podcast or a YouTube channel, you can evaluate it in that way, and maybe people will want to hear more of what you have to say when you actually publish something peer-reviewed or what have you, or give a conference paper.
Thank you. At this point, I think we've reached the end of our time for our regularly scheduled programming. However, I would like to open it up to Q&A for either individual panelists or the entire panel, if you like, so we can address your specific questions of the people who are here present, our participants.
I actually saw a really good question in chat about independent scholars, and I would love to talk about that a little bit. As independent scholars, would I be able to influence those established in their field, including professors? Would I be taken seriously if I'm not a faculty member elsewhere? And I would say yes. The field has changed, and you no longer have to have a university or college under your name in order to be able to give papers at conferences, or to do to write articles, or even to get grants. If you're doing, as Lawson keeps saying, Google things, and you will see more and more people are putting independent researcher under their name. It's and it may be that you have a job doing something completely different during the day, but your passion is Assyriology, and so you write that article. You write that article and get it published, and you're an independent researcher. That's great. I suspect there are going to be more and more people like that, in fact, in the future.
If I can just add on that, I agree. I would just stress that publish only in well-known, peer-reviewed, respectable journals, because if you publish your independent research in some these weird journals that they now send out invitations for everybody to publish in, nobody's going to take you seriously. And not only is it for your that make you look good, but it also, if you have a good peer review system, you'll have good input on your ideas to hone them and to make them more palatable to the scholarly community.
Yeah, the peer review system is actually for your benefit. I mean, sure, you can get a reviewer who really doesn't do a very good job, but on the other hand, most of the time, I have found that they bring up a point. There's something that is, that I've overlooked or something, and so it's always good to get that review. Now you can do that by having peers look at it before you even send it in. Of course, you can read it as a paper at a conference, but the peer review system is intended to help actually make the papers better and have better quality. And many of us do peer review and take it quite seriously. So don't be afraid of it.
If I may, I wanted to bring up another point which was only touched on very briefly. That's the issue of grants. Speaking for Israeli institutions and European institutions, grants are now one of the primary criteria for marking people as the people you want. I mean, and there are several institutions in Europe and Israel that will accept hands down someone who just received an ERC grant. That's the European Research Council grant. You got that, you have the job. You know, the University of Munich used to put out advertisements in the Economist, full page advertisement in the Economist. You have an ERC, come to us, you will get a job. No questions asked. So I don't know if that works all over, but that's something to take into account and to start at an early stage of career. Now, too often, grant writing and the tricks behind it are not something that are given in the training that most people receive at universities. Some do it, but I think even if you're not getting formal education, participating in grant writing, whether with your peers, with your professor, or for whatever it is, whether it's a travel grant, whether it's a conference grant, whether all kinds of various things are open also for junior scholars, you should do it, because that's a serious component of what you are required to do as your career develops. And it's good to start it early.
Thank you. So I don't see any questions in the chat right now, so I'll jump over to our list of questions that our early career scholars had suggested earlier. And one that I assume will take up a good amount of our time is, how can I best prepare myself to transition from being a PhD candidate to a scholar on the job market? Jay, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, one of the main things, I mean, we've kind of talked around it a lot, but the thing I think I would focus on most is being a good communicator. So I tend to see communication as the fundamental thing that we all do. If you want to be a teacher, if you want to write, if you want to present your research, you have to be a good communicator. And that could be orally, that could be in written form. And the other thing I would add to this is, as you make that transition, see yourself in two different veins. One is a researcher, and this was something that was touched on earlier, and that's where you try to create your niche, you try to find your specialty, you be an expert in something. But on the other hand, you're an intellectual now. You're part of a broader community of people who think, who have ideas, who have things that go well beyond archaeology or Egyptology or even Assyriology. And please go well beyond Assyriology. We need this, right? Our fields need to be bigger than parsing Sumerian verbs or understanding sedimentary layers. We need to be able to think bigger and communicate why all of this matters to a world that says, this stuff isn't important anymore. And we need to be able to think about, how does our work impact upon critical scholarship, upon critical thinking? How does the foundations of our fields as grounded and rooted in colonialism and racism, how does that impact upon who we are as scholars, and how do we change that? All of these things need to be part of our broader intellectual pursuits, and not just, how can I get a job in Assyriology, which sadly probably won't. So be an intellectual more so than demanding you try to get a particular job in a particular sphere.
I think that's a wonderful way to approach it, especially as the job market tightens. And this kind of goes back to another question that I saw was asked: what are some of the deal breakers on a job interview? Don't ever think that a job that you're applying for is beneath you. Dr. Trochet talked about it a little bit. Teaching high school is a wonderful thing. If you are going to be an intellectual, if this is how you're going to approach your life, and you decided you want to teach, okay, you're going down in terms of age, but that doesn't mean you're lowering your standards. Or if you love research, but you're doing research for an insurance company or something, well, you're still doing research, and you're still able to engage in some of these things that you really like doing. So when you go into that when you're thinking broadly about what you're going to be doing with your PhD, or thinking about going into this job interview, don't be going in thinking, well, this is just I'm going to do this for a couple of years and then I'm going to get the job I really want. Take it seriously. Go in, and I'm kind of appalled by the people who walk into my room and for an interview and say, basically, I'm just doing this till I can get someplace better. You know, it's shocking, and of course you're going to get turned down. So, you know, think about it positively. What are the things that I have that I'd love to do, that I'm really good at? And okay, maybe I'm not going to walk into a job in academia the way I thought it was, but there are a lot of different avenues open. I mean, I've been sending some of my undergraduates to gaming places, because all of a sudden everybody wants backgrounds that are authentic. Okay, great. I got people who know how to research that. So like I said, be positive. Think about your own personal strengths and what it is that you like to do, and maybe think a little bit more flexibly than just traditional academia.
I would want to second what Jay was talking about. I think there's a whole cadre of things in the liberal arts that, whether you're an Assyriologist, Egyptologist, etc., you can draw on. Linguistic theory, sociology, anthropology. They're just a whole array of areas that can be studied and brought to bear on our subjects. Oftentimes, that people have traditionally within, let's say, Assyriology, we'll pick on it for a minute, have been apt not to apply. And when you look at some of the more exciting thinkers in the late 20th century, early part of the 21st century in Assyriology, I'm thinking of Mario Liverani, for instance. You're looking at someone who's bringing all kinds of various different aspects of the liberal arts to bear on his work in Assyriology. So that's just I think this can give you all kinds of different niches, and also make you a person who is much more flexible. We haven't talked about it much. I mean, and all of us are not at liberal arts colleges, but this is what liberal arts colleges are looking for in most instances. People who have a lot of flexibility, who might be able to teach something in this area and that area, and not just be a one-tent show. Yeah. So.
I would add that something that I found very helpful throughout my career is that even when I was not asked, I was always trying to give a course that I hadn't given before. I would say I'm fortunate that I've been teaching archaeology, and for the most part, Bronze Iron Age, so-called biblical archaeology, and nothing much besides that throughout my career, as opposed to in many contexts, you have to teach all kinds of courses. But even there, I went out of my comfort zone, even within the fields I'm familiar with, and at times also farther afield, for the very reason that very often that led me to something else which was irrelevant for my research. So forgetting for a second the possibility that you're going to be teaching in a completely different field, environment, level of education, etc. But if you are in some sort of college-like environment, and you do teach your things that are close to your field, if you do teach things that force you to think about how to prepare the thing and how this relates to your research, you have something to gain from that. That's one point. Another point for the transition between being a PhD student or a postdoctoral student and a job, I think we have to return again to something that's been noticed is your skills at communicating on various levels. Being academics and all being experts on little insignificant details, we're all more or less in the spectrum. So we all have to work very hard to make ourselves appear to be communicating what we want to say in a palatable manner. And I think that can be done both by, for example, when you're a student, also taking courses in how to teach, doing that when you're a junior scholar. Very often institutions whether give you the opportunity or force you to take these type of workshops. And the other thing is, make yourself known and shown in forums where other scholars meet. That means that at a conference, don't be obnoxious, but ask questions, approach people, get yourself known, get into the the works. And I think by showing that you ask an interesting question, you bring up an interesting point, your lecture is well prepared, well thought out, and show something new, you will get the attention that will both enable you to get the job and move ahead in the job or between jobs.
Mhm.
I'll briefly add to that. I'll try to be quick though, because I do see there are other questions in the chat as well. I had a friend who was applying to jobs and wasn't getting as much traction. So I looked at her cover letter, and the cover letter is equally important for jobs as the personal statement is for a PhD program, right? And the cover letter, basically, she wasn't, to me, it was a framing issue. And so, we might have degrees in archaeology and classics and in Egyptology, Assyriology, NELC, but you're no longer that. You're now an art historian. You're now a historian. You're now a religious studies scholar who specializes in this area. And so there almost was this sort of apology of, well, I know I'm this, but I can also do your thing, history department. It's like, no. You're a historian who just so happens to work in ancient Egypt, let's say. And so I think framing your CV and all of your materials in that way, which also might mean that you might have like 5 different application sort of portfolios, right, for different fields. And so I think, and then if you're applying for an Egyptology postdoc at Brown, which they have one, and then of course you're an Egyptologist, right? But sort of know your audience. The second thing in sort of transitioning, imposter syndrome is a real thing, especially I think for young scholars, for female scholars, for scholars of color. Imposter syndrome can be very, for anybody, but it can be very real, especially if you're not seeing yourself in your department or in your field more generally. And so don't underestimate, I think, the power of peer mentorship. So I have a couple colleagues and friends who we peer mentor each other, right? It's just somebody else to sort of to have that strength as you go through it. People who might have similar experiences to you. And I think that's really valid to sort of find people who can share in your experiences, listen to your experiences, give advice, who may or may not be your mentors, but again, peer mentoring, I think is really important, especially in combating that imposter syndrome, which is so present among so many of my brilliant colleagues. It's upsetting how sort of present it is among so many brilliant scholars. The final point is people have spoken to research, people have spoken to teaching, and service is the third tower of the academic market. And it's really, service is I've been here going to my 4th year and I've already been on 2 job searches and chaired one, right? Like it's a big part of what you do in a department, and people want to see that you're organized, see that you'll take your fair share, that you're in it, you'll take one for the team, you're a participant in governance in the department, those sorts of things. So if you're a grad student and you can be part of graduate student council or anything kind of like that, I say get involved in those things, or that could be another extracurricular in your free time that you add, because that will show that you will be a member of the department and a contributing member outside of teaching, which is in the classroom, kind of solitary, outside of research, which can be solitary. Service is really the way that you give back to your department. And in interviews, I know I was told as part of my interview, one of the reasons I got the job, I was here as a lecturer for a year before, and coming back, they're like, I know she's going to be a colleague, like a real colleague who will show up and do the work and participate. And that means a lot to a lot of people, more maybe than your research or teaching evaluation numbers. So yeah.
think
Yeah, we're
that's a
not paid
fabulous
enough
point.
to have grumps as colleagues.
So I think that's a fabulous point to end on. We do have to end our sessions. I know there's 100 more questions out there. So I'll put out 2 plugs. The first one is coming up in the fall. We have our next brown bag session on non-traditional careers, or I should say careers outside of the academy. So we welcome you all to look out for that with a whole new set of panelists. Also at the upcoming annual meeting, our session that was supposed to be this year addressing a lot of these topics, so I think we'll try to find a focused topic that we haven't discussed yet, is our workshop called Navigating the In-Between, which will be a similar style panel discussion in which we open questions to our early career scholars constituencies to have some input on what their biggest concerns is about moving through academic life. So I want to thank so much all of our panelists for their very valuable input and for giving us their time to disseminate their wisdom upon us. And thank you all for joining us for the sessions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks everybody for organizing. And if anybody wants to write to me, please feel free to.
I was going to say, we're all here and we've all told you to go on the web and find us. So we're waiting for your emails.
Right.
Also, this lecture will be available, this brown bag session will be available on ASOR's YouTube channel, along with all of our previous brown bag and future brown bag sessions. So we aim to make this a perpetual resource available to you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Bye.